Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
you gotta be confident about your Achilles when you show up.
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris Dowhouse,
hearing about Mr. Pointless in fantasy
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
Let's see if we can keep it going as we go into the fourth round on the flippity flop, where we get to pick in the higher portion of the fourth round. Now, for this one, Chris is going to pick between the nominees. It's going to be me nominating players and Adam nominating his player. So, Adam, why don't you go ahead and talk about your nominee here for the fourth round?
Jermaine Burton.
No, it's not Jermaine Burton, but I was going to lead into it's another guy who I have spoken about and probably a little bit too much. You're probably tired of hearing me talk about, and it's DJ Moore, a guy who all offseason I've been really big on. When it comes to this range, these guys that we're looking at, there's not many guys who had his points per game from last year. So just starting from that, he had a really great season last year. 14 points per game and half-point PPR where we're drafting is awesome. Now, look, the situation has changed a little bit. Some good, some bad. The weapons around him have gotten better. Keenan Allen's a massive target hog. We know that he's a guy who's going to demand targets, a guy who's going to be, key on the underneath, quarterback's best friend, especially for a young quarterback like Caleb Williams. But circling back to the upgrades, Caleb Williams is a massive upgrade as a passer to someone like Justin Fields. And while you might be a little bit worried with some rookies that they're just going to lock on to that slot receiver, Caleb Williams is a guy that we know is going to want to extend plays, is going to want to push the ball down the field. And while I think, that aspect of his game is maybe a little bit overblown, that, he's trying to do that all the time. I think he is willing to take the check down when he's got a team that can support that. But look, he's going to try to make plays. That's the reality of the situation. And DJ Moore is going to be the playmaker early on in his Bears career. Look, Rhamondre, who I love, develops into that. And he could even develop into it fairly quickly. But I think that they've put Caleb Williams in a great position to see success as a rookie. And as a result, I think DJ Moore is going to be that guy that's, being their playmaker down the field more often than not.
I can't argue, Adam, because, he got paid, right? Keenan Allen's fat, apparently. They overblown the whole 230-pound thing. Like, he's fat and he's slow. I'm like, he ran a 4.7 and he's playing the slot. Who cares?
He's never been on. Yeah.
It's just funny. But yeah, can't argue with that at all. And I forgot to go over the ADP range. So DJ Moore, very much in the ADP range of what we're talking about here, the fourth round, 4 through 6 picks. Other guys in that range right now are looking like DK Metcalf, Lamar Jackson, Stephon Diggs, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker. The one guy I have in here because his ADP is actually closer to the next round, but I'm a little bit higher on him. So I'm going to nominate him here. We're both nominating wide receivers, by the way. That's Devonta Smith. So Devonta Smith is somebody that I feel like always gets overlooked because, well, he's got A.J. Brown as a teammate, right? And A.J. Brown, we know, is going to be the wide receiver one. Over the last couple of years, Brown had a 28% target share to Smith's 27 in 2022. And then in 2023, Brown increased the gap to 30% to Smith's 24%, although be it wasn't really a great offensive year for the Eagles, especially in the second half of the season anyway. Chris, you and I had this conversation off air that the vibe I'm getting about Devonta Smith, when you look at all the beat report writers, and and one friend, Dave Zangara of NBC, talked to him quite frequently. The feeling we get is that Devonta Smith and his sharp route running is about to take another step this year, and that literally nobody can cover him. Now, I don't know this because the Eagles secondary is still bad. That could still be the case. But we do think they've upgraded in quite a few places, right? So everything has been, Devonta Smith looks like he's primed to take another leap this season. And for a guy on an offense with Kellen Moore that should look a hell of a lot better than it did last year, it can't look any worse, especially in the second half of the year. Let's just put it that way. I do think Devonta Smith can be way higher than what his ADP is, which is wide receiver 22. I think we're drafting him at his floor. And in this instance, if I'm doing the math correctly, he'd be our third receiver. which in a lot of these leagues, that would be lights out. It's either going to be you're either starting 3 receivers or he's a flex play. And if he has the value to be a top 10 receiver, which by the way, 2022, he was a top 10 wide receiver in points per game. So we've already seen him be able to do it. It's nothing but upside, I think, at where he's being drafted. So for me, I'm giving you Devonta Smith, who has a little bit of a less target share distribution he has to worry about with DJ Moore, doesn't have to worry about the rookie quarterback. I think Kellen Moore is a better play caller than Shane Waldron, although you can say the stats are a little bit comparable between the two. But that's why I'm going with Devonta Smith. So, Chris, Devonta Smith or DJ Moore as the 2 nominees, who would you select here?
Yeah, both excellent nominees. I just want to make sure I understood, Dan. Did you say DK Metcalf was one of the options for this round? Because that would be really hard for me to pass on receiver 3.
His ADP is here. So his ADP hits just enough in the 4th round where I needed to include him in the list. He is a little bit hit or miss as far as he actually make it that far. He's kind of like in that 3-4 turn-ish. So he'd be a little bit higher than necessarily where we'd be picking.
So going back to the guys that you guys are nominating, I love DJ Moore's, what he was able to do last year, being Justin Fields at receiver 1. I think there's a lot of things you talked about Adam, him being able to be a guy who can be faceted in his attack, where he can get down the field and also be able to do underneath stuff. So it's not a guy who's just doing one thing. Dan, we talked about, like you said, off the air about Devonta Smith, how we heard about him excelling in practice, how he's just basically unstoppable. And the thing for me that I'm going to go with Devonta Smith is that stands out to me is, going back to Kellen Moore and looking at the Cowboy days when Dak Prescott had one of his better years, when he was able to feed 3 receivers, Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb all were able to eat. I think Devonta Smith is kind of a hybrid position in the sense what CeeDee Lamb was and Michael Gallup was in that offense, where he can kind of do a little bit of both. He could be that guy who could move around, be that slot receiver, but also can be a guy who could stretch the field. AJ is going to be that receiver 1, I think, but Devonta's going to see a lot of, second corners, a guy who's going to be able to get easy, opportunities to get separation. And then, like I said, I think similar to DJ Moore, I think the playbook's going to be there for him to be able to do multiple things. I like the Eagles' offense upside more so I'm going to go with the safer guy who doesn't have necessarily as many mouths to feed, and I'll go with Devonta Smith.
Okay, so just to recap now, we got Justin Jefferson, we got Travis Etienne, Cooper Kupp, Devonta Smith. Okay. I should have probably prefaced this. We are doing this based on half-point PPR scoring, and standard leagues mostly, for the most part, start 3 receivers, a flex, a tight end, 2 running backs, and a quarterback. So we'll keep it rolling with that. So now we can go into the 5th round. Pick 7 through 9 against the back end of the 5th. Here we come, and we got. I'm losing my place here. We got Chase is going to pick between the 2 nominees, between Adam and Chris. Okay, so ADP wise, in the 5th round, the back end of the 5th round, this is kind of what we're looking at. We're talking about guys like Aaron Jones, George Pickens, T. Higgins, James Conner, Rhamondre Stevenson. ADP wise, back in the 5th round, those are the type of names that we're looking at here. Let's see, based off of your guys' tiers, who you want to nominate. Adam, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so this is more of a last round. I went with a guy who had a monster 2023. This round I'm going for a guy who I'm projecting a bounce back, and that's with T. Higgins out of Cincinnati. Now look, we may not want to get the extra receiver here, and that's just something that I didn't know when we were setting this up. But look, T. Higgins would still be an excellent flex option. I think the price has kind of come down to where it's a lot more reasonable this year. Look, he was kind of being drafted as almost as if he was an extra wide receiver 1 rather than being the wide receiver 2 of this offense with Chase as the alpha. Now I think he is being correctly identified as a guy, down to that next tier where I think he becomes a value. Now look, he had a bunch of injury issues last year. And he started off the year incredibly slow outside of his one, I think it was like week 3 or 4, like monster game. But when he came back the last time healthy, he did look a lot more like himself. He had I think 3 touchdowns over his last 3 or 4 games. It was a big part of that offense. That was with Burrow out still. And Burrow never really looking himself during that same period in which T. Higgins was having issues at the beginning of the season. There was just a lot that went wrong in Cincinnati last year. And I entrust that is, his performance last year was a culmination of all of those things that went wrong rather than a testament to Teagan's skill, who I think is still a very, very good receiver, a guy who I think could be an alpha receiver on some teams, or at least, a Michael Pittman-esque, like, hey, I'm that 1A guy. You probably want to pair me, but don't, I'm not a 2. It just happens that he is with a true alpha. So T. Higgins is an incredible talent. I think Burrow is going to be back. And as such, I think this is really good value here, at least, in my drafts, when I'm seeing him in the 5th round, I really like it.
He's got a lot to prove, right? He's got a lot to prove this year.
Contract year.
I know. Contract. Everything's at stake right now. This is his time to get paid. He's got a lot to prove, a lot to do, a lot of reasons to be motivated this season. 100%. All right, Chris. So let's talk about your nominee here in the back end of the 5th round.
Well, so first, I like what Adam was, considering doing there with T. Higgins as that 4th receiver, like he says, a flex option, but also a guy who's a red zone option. Maybe Devonta Smith doesn't score the touchdowns you're looking for, so you have a guy that maybe you can kind of rotate the 2 of those guys as a nice little receiver 3 option. But I'm going to stick in the backfield, Dan, and I'm going to go with, this is a tough one because I have 3 running backs that you listed, all basically neck and neck. I mean, I could flip a coin and be happy with any of them. I originally had James Conner because I like the upside, I like how he ended the season, like the offense adding Marvin Harrison, so we already see them be effective without any passing attack. Imagine if they actually could have somebody you had to honor on the outside. But I changed my mind and I went with Rhamondre Stevenson. And Rhamondre Stevenson is the guy that's a little rich a little high maybe for me, Dan. But what I'm looking at is the guy who can be a true bell cow back. We've seen this offense with Van Pelt in Cleveland, feed Nick Chubb, a guy that we know is one of the top RB options. So you could have particularly a RB, the guy who can be that feature running back that can just grind it out. But what Rhamondre Stevenson also brings to the table, and I know they signed Gibson, but Rhamondre Stevenson can catch the ball. So with a Jacoby Brissett, with a Drake May, whoever the quarterback is going to be, I think you're going to see a lot of check down opportunities as well. This offense was checking down the ball a lot last year. I know it's different offensive play calling, but you still see that the offensive line isn't very good. So a lot of times that back becomes your best friend. And then you look at the red zone. Rhamondre Stevenson has not scored touchdowns the last couple of years. It's almost craziness in a sense. But the guy's 240 pounds. It's a matter of time until he starts getting staying healthy and being able to be effective in the red zone. I like Aaron Jones a lot. I like James Conner a lot. I think they're guys that have a lot of upside. But I'm going to go with the guy who I think could be a bell cow as our RB2 to balance out the Travis Etienne. Like I said, a guy who's maybe not be a touchdown guy, another touchdown guy. Hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, before Chase jumps in there, I want to add something to that. One part of the reason why Rhamondre Stevenson hasn't had many touchdowns because that offense has been terrible. They haven't had situations where they could score very often, and I don't know that changes necessarily this year. But what I am going to say to that is, remember, 2022. Rhamondre Stevenson was RB14 on a points per game basis, even without necessarily getting all the touchdowns in the world. I'm not worried about Antonio Gibson factoring in a significant way here. They paid Rhamondre to be the offense. So, Chris, I wanted to put that out there because Rhamondre, I mean, he's near and dear to my heart. I'm like one of the highest rankers on him.
You're the big, you're a big Rhamondre dude. Yeah.
I was going to say real quick, Dan, not necessarily the offense is going to be as bad, but I think the offense should be improved, particularly have 2 mobile quarterbacks where second run, Drake May can run. It's going to bring an added element to the passing running attack, I should say, where I think that last 2 years was, Zappy and Matt Jones, there was no element of keeping guys honest.
All right, Chase. So choose between Adam's nominee of T. Higgins and Chris's nominee of Rhamondre Stevenson.
I my heart wants to maybe go running back here, but I liked what Adam said about T. Higgins and a bounce back year. We had actually talked earlier about the idea of if Chase and if Lamb can't get their contract situations going. Well, we know Higgins had contract drama, but Higgins is going to be there for them this year. And if anything goes wrong with Jamar Chase, T. Higgins is the alpha over there. I don't mind that kind of depth. I actually have T. Higgins as a 4th round pick, as a mid 4th round pick. We could have taken him with our last pick, and I would have been happy with it. So I'm going to go with T. Higgins here over Rhamondre Stevenson. I'm like you said, I'm a little leery of that offense up there in New England in investing pretty much anything in them. If I am going to invest in them, it's probably Rhamondre, but I don't have Rhamondre ranked quite as high as I would have T. Higgins. I'll gladly take T. Higgins. We're stacking up depth at that wide receiver position.
We sure are. So yeah, just to recap, we're through 5 rounds now. Picking at the back end of the 1st round and snake drafting our way through. So we have Justin Jefferson, Travis Etienne, Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins we just took, Devonta Smith. I'm missing somebody. I feel like I'm missing somebody.
Jefferson in the 1st, Etienne in the 2nd, Kupp, Devonta Smith, and now T. Higgins. So we have 4 wide receivers and a running back through 5 rounds.
Not missing anybody. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm good with the pick of Higgins. I just want to question real quick, guys. Higgins is a good player, but statistically, he hasn't really been fantasy awesome for 5 years almost now. I mean, His best year was 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns, and that was 2022. That was 2 years in a row. That was his back-to-back years. So, I mean, the guy's never scored double-digit touchdowns since 2020, and his high was 7.
Pre-Jamar Chase. Chris, you're kind of preaching to the choir a little bit on this one. So I have T. Higgins ranked as the wide receiver 27. I think I've talked about this on the show earlier in the summer, but I linked him to Mike Williams, a guy who has a lot of promise. People are big on every single year, but usually winds up getting injured, missing a handful of games. And that's been a pretty consistent theme of his. The highest he's ever finished was wide receiver 15 on a points per game basis. And that was back in 2022. That was his best year statistically. He's never surpassed 1,100 yards, never had more than 7 touchdowns in a single season. And I think he's more of a wide receiver 3 as a result of that. So I'm kind of with you on that as well. I'll throw it out there, but still a very strong pick as a flex play. And we're not,
you got him as a wide receiver 3 and we just took him as our wide receiver 4. So,
yeah,
I mean,
no, we're not hating the pick. I'm with Chris here. Yep. I do think there is some things about T. Higgins. And that's why I said to Adam, he's got a lot to prove this year. He's got a lot he's got to prove this year, and that's one of the reasons why. All right, so let's move on here to the 6 rounds. We're snaking back around, so the back half, first half of the 6th round. Before we get to that, we do have a question coming in, and that's from James Thompson once again. So how are we feeling about drafting receivers from these teams with 3 wide receivers? So I think this is a very good question. Very rarely do they all go for 1,000 yards. There's a few teams out there, of course, looking at the Bears and the Texans especially. I'll say this real quick, and then somebody else can jump in. Most likely, one of the receivers of the Bears, one of the receivers of the Texans are not going to perform up to ADP. And this is where you're going to need to plant your flag on which one of those 3 you think that is going to be. Because on merit, as far as the offense, the talent goes of both those teams and their 3 receivers, you can't really rank them too much lower than what they already are. So you're going to have to plant your flag on who you think that odd man out is. For me, it's been Nico Collins for the Texans, and Keenan Allen for the Bears has been my odd man out. I think I just recently moved Rhamondre above Keenan Allen in my rankings for redraft this season. So you just have to plant your flag. Everybody's going to have a different take on that. What do you guys think about 3 receivers being able to go off, especially in those 2 offenses? Because I know we've seen it once before, but that was with, I think, more established quarterback play, more established offensive systems. Both of these are kind of new with rookie quarterbacks. So I think it's a little bit more, I should say a little less of a chance of it actually being able to happen. But go ahead. Anybody want to jump in there?
I was going to say, I thought it was Jared Goff's 2nd or 3rd year when you're talking about the receivers. He had Robert Woods, Brandon Cooks, and Cooper Kupp, where he's able to kind of feed 3 receivers. You also saw, more recently, you've had different teams, being able to get close to those 3, be able to feed as close to those 3 receivers. So I don't think it's, unreasonable, but I'm with you, Dan. I think you got to plant your, flag on one of the guys. You're probably going to have one guy who winds up being like a receiver 4, receiver 5 flex option versus the other 2 are guys that you're going to have in your lineup probably week in, week out.
You could probably throw Green Bay and Seattle in this same question. It's the same exact thing. You've got deep wide receiver cores, and you, like you said, Dan, you have to make a decision. If you bet right on one of them, you could hit gold and be a jackpot. If you bet wrong, you might have set yourself back a little bit. But if you've drafted well elsewhere, you should be able to make it through.
And quickly, just to add, you bring up Seattle there, which is a great addition. And part of what's been the thing with Seattle has been the other option is that you just see a ton of volatility between the receivers and that they all have their weeks, but on a game-to-game basis, you don't feel like you trust those guys. They end up as more flex options as a result that are boom or bust. That's the other, world that happens when you have, that much talent in your receiver room.
Well, Chris, I was just going to say, I'm glad you brought up the Rams. So there's this perception that all 3 receivers went off. They didn't. Only 2 receivers got over 1,000 yards, and then there was one of them would be left hanging where 700 yards, and it wasn't until Goff's 3rd year that really started happening, where all 3 receivers could kind of eat to some degree.
How about the Cowboys?
I would point that out there. You're going to have to give me a minute on the Cowboys, but we do have to kind of move on here. The point is kind of taken. All right, so back to the 6th round. So Adam's going to pick between the 2 nominees. Chase and I are going to be talking about our nominees for this range. So in the 6th round, beginning of the 6th round, right now the ADP range in this particular round is looking like Kyle Pitts, DeAndre Swift, Tank Dell, Kyler Murray, Zamir White, Najee Harris. Those seems to be the names for the most part that we're looking at. Chase, you go ahead and talk about your nominee first.
All right. Well, Either way, it looks like we're setting ourselves up to take a non-wide receiver here. My nominee here is going to be Zamir White. I know not everybody on this show is as high on Zamir White as I seem like I am comparatively, but if I can leave round 6, which is what we're in, with 2 running backs and 4 wide receivers, or maybe 3 wide receivers, and my quarterback, I feel pretty good about the build that I'm making right now. And at this level, right where we're at, White's the highest ranked running back that I still have on the board here. I have him ranked as running back 19. And listen, he was effective as the lead back late last year. He was relatively efficient. I'm not worried about any of the quote unquote talent behind him. I think we know what we're going to get with with Madison. I think we know what we're going to get with Amir Abdullah if he's still there. I'm not worried about Dylan Laube's skill set taking over as a lead back anytime soon there. He might take some pass looks away, but I'm not worried about that talent behind him. They upgraded their O-line when they took Jackson Powers Johnson. That should really help White, who had really good yards after contact metrics last year. The problem was he was getting hit all the damn time, so all his yards had to come after contact pretty much, and he doesn't force many missed tackles. He's actually pretty low on the missed tackle, forced missed tackles ranks. So I think he's a solid volume RB2. We would be taking him as our RB2 right here. And I'm comfortable with that. We've got plenty of wide receiver talent on the board. And like I said, I think Zamir White's going to have the volume to be effective in line with several other running backs that we've all come to know and love.
Here's what I think is funny, Chase. We're both going to be nominating players that we're projecting. Right.
Exactly.
We're both going to be nominating players that haven't necessarily done it before. And the guy
for a full season. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And the guy I'm going to nominate myself is going to be Kyle Pitts. So when we get to the 6th round territory, we start to get to that end of the top tier tight ends. And in my book, I think there's 7 top tier tight ends. And we cap it off kind of with Kyle Pitts and George Kittle. And there's Kincaid, McBride, Andrews, Laporta, and of course, Travis Kelce, Mr. Swift himself. And when we're getting to the 6th round, I think we're getting to the back end here where it's kind of hit or miss. If it's Kyle Pitts or George Kittle is the last one still available, but one of them normally is. And so far in this ADP range has been Kyle Pitts, and that's kind of where I have my own tier rankings listed out. So that's why I'm going with him. Look, again, I will reiterate. He's had 1,000-yard season, okay? His rookie year with terrible quarterback play and with Arthur Smith. We've seen him do it before. The other factor I put into here is that, look, did he disappoint 2 years in a row? Yes, he did. Last year, it wasn't just the quarterback play, though. It wasn't just Arthur Smith. Flat out, we got burned because we didn't know how hurt he was, okay? We really did not know the significance of the injury. We understand now how banged up he was. And I think that plays a huge factor. Now it's Zach Robinson calling plays. Now it's Kirk Cousins as a quarterback. Yeah. Kirk Cousins can't go. It's Michael Penix, who's not even playing in the last game as a rookie because we're like, we already know how good he is. We doesn't need to play in the last game in the finale in the preseason. It's incredible. So no matter how we break this down, I think London and Kyle Pitts in particular are safe in what they're going to have in front of them. And I want in on the Kyle Pitts breakout year. We've been off so far. I want in when it actually happens. It's going to happen this year. So Kyle Pitts is my nominee. Go ahead, Adam.
Oh, I want to gamble. I really want to gamble. I think I have to go Kyle Pitts. I can't quit on the kid. I think I'm always going to be biased being a football person first, and the talent to me is so far in the Kyle Pitts corner. I believe in the talent. Look, Zamir White to me, it's an interesting conundrum because I think he is going to get a lot of volume. I think he's going to maintain that job. I'm not worried about the running backs behind him, which I know are some people's concerns. But that offense is going to stink. Like I think he's going to get a ton of volume. Like when they get in the end zone, it's similar to Rhamondre. And Rhamondre we talked about a round ago. So I think this is fair value for Zamir White. So I don't mean to discourage that, but for me, man, the talent on Kyle Pitts is insane. These are both starting spots that we're filling still. And I have the added benefit of being able to, like you can in a draft, right? Look a little bit deeper down the draft board. I see the next 2 nominees. And I know we're finally going to fill that spot. So I'm less concerned.
I was thinking the same thing just now.
I looked down and was like, all right, we're not locked into 2 wide receivers in the next one. So I'm allowed to do the right thing.
Yep.
To me, the higher player on my board is Kyle Pitts. I'm going Kyle Pitts.
Love it. Love it. All right. So again, we're going to recap Justin Jefferson, Travis Etienne, Cooper Kupp, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, Kyle Pitts, baby. That's a very solid 6 rounds. I'm liking how this team is shaping up. Before we get to the 7th round, I want to address James Thompson's question here. A lot of Njoku production came with Flacco. Is he being overvalued? Quick word. Yes, absolutely. Yes. 100% positively. So right now, David Njoku, his ADP is tight end 10. I have him ranked outside my top 12. Now, when I say I have him ranked outside my top 12, I have him at tight end 13. He's just outside my top 12. But the point that he, had, I think it was 60% of his production for the entire season came in like the 5 games with Joe Flacco. Like, it hasn't happened with Deshaun Watson on the field. Now, maybe the Browns go more pass heavy. That's been the MO. They're going to go more pass heavy. Maybe that helps. But we look at Watson's career. When has he ever featured a tight end? Ever. Even in his prime. He didn't throw to the tight end. He throws to the outside. He doesn't even throw it to the slot. He throws it to the perimeter wide receivers. That's who he targets. So I don't see this thing happening with David Njoku. Anybody else want to chime in on that one?
No, his 3 best games, or his 4 best games all came with Flacco. I mean, he didn't have a single game. I mean, he had 1 game week 8 with 17 fantasy points. Otherwise, he didn't crack 13 fantasy points until after Flacco came along. And I mean, the talent, it's not a talent issue. It's like you said, it's how does Deshaun Watson distribute the football when he's the guy in charge? And everything we've seen, he's the guy in charge. No, it's not. That's a no-brainer.